Hello, and welcome to the Daily Bible Podcast with Tricia and Michelle. We're just two friends reading through the Bible chronologically and encouraging you to do the same. You can join us by using your own 1 year chronological Bible, or you can print it out. Or you can print it out on the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan and a link to that plan, and also a link to the Bible that we are using. Those links are at dailybiblepodcast.net.
And we are so glad you're here. We are excited that you're on this journey and we are loving this time together. And I hope you are enjoying it too.
Yes, yes. We are so thankful that you have decided to join us for this. And for today, we read Genesis chapter 18, chapter 19, chapter 20, and just part of chapter 21 through verse 7. And so, what we read today is what happened in between the time that God promised Sarah a child, that he said, there will be a baby that is going to be born, and Abraham will be a father of many nations. And so what in the timeline, what we see is that there was three men that came to Abraham and Sarah's tent as they were visiting. And I'm sure that if you've gone through Sunday school as a child, you probably remember this story, is that they said that when they came back in a year, Sarah would have a baby, her own baby, not a baby by a maid or a servant, but she would have her own baby. And of course, this was kind of a little like, what? Because I'm way past the age. And I mean, seriously, Trisha, wouldn't you feel that way too? I mean,
Uh,
if
yes, I'm only
because
51 and I'd be like, what in the world? I have a 33-year-old. Let's what? Yeah, no.
yeah, because she was way past childbearing age. I mean, and so she felt and she knew she was old. I mean, there's no way around it. She was old. So it's interesting to me as I was reading through this time this morning, we catch the theme of denial here.
Mhm.
In verse 15 of chapter 18, Sarah was afraid, so she denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh."
It's
And
almost like
and
my kids are like, "Oh, I really meant I was just saying," or what. I didn't laugh. I could just picture my kids
uh-huh.
doing the same thing.
And it's like, nope, caught, sweetie. And also during this time, Sodom and Gomorrah continued down the path of wickedness and destruction. And it seems so dark. It seems so dark to move from Sarah being promised this child to all of a sudden back through Sodom and Gomorrah and just watching what was going to happen. And so, here's where God says, I'm going to wipe them out.
Mhm.
It's not the flood again, but it's something similar. I'm going to wipe them out. They are just so wicked, so full of sin. And Abraham's like, "No, no, God, if there's 50 people, will you please spare the city?" And God's like, well, for 50. And then Abraham's like, for 45, and then he's going down increments of five here. But what about 440? What about for 30? What about for 20? And then finally he's like, God, please, if there are 10 righteous
Mhm.
people, would you please save the city? And God's like, okay, okay. And so we see angels of the Lord that went into Sodom,
And
into
obviously there weren't 10 because they didn't save the city.
I know. Can you imagine walking through that city? Can you imagine what it was like for the
Mm.
angels of the Lord to walk through that city and see? I just can't imagine. There was so much chaos that ensued. These angels, they told Lot, you have to leave
Mhm.
because this place is going to be destroyed. Like we're giving you an out here. We're letting you know what's going to happen and you have to leave. They told him to run for his life. And Lot just sits there and tries to negotiate with them and is like, but what about there's this one little town, and they're like, go run, and he's like,
Get out of
but
here.
yeah, and so they're like, okay, fine, fine, you go where you want to go, you go there to the mountains. um but then in the end of the story, his wife looks back,
Mhm.
And I think so many times, that's me. I'm, God's saying, "Go, just move ahead," and I'm like, "But can I watch the destruction back here?" It's like we none of us can. It's like the car wreck on an interstate. We all have to look, and we all slow down, everybody behind us,
I
because
know, it's so
we
true.
have to look. And my fiance, he keeps saying, "Just keep your eyes on the road. You don't have to look. What good is that gonna do for you? That's not gonna encourage you. That's not going to change your life in any way. Just keep looking forward. Put those blinders on.
Yes.
Do not turn to a pillar of salt." And then also, as we move further into the story, we see Lot and his daughters as they settle in the mountains. His daughters are despairing over their
Mhm.
singleness, and they're despairing over their lack, that they do not have any children. And so they take matters into their own hands. And just like things happened yesterday when we saw Abram and Sarah taking, well, mostly Sarah, taking matters into her own hands, here we're seeing those daughters taking matters into their own hands. And meanwhile, Abraham is moving again. And to keep himself safe, he's telling the king of the place where he's moving to, oh, by the way, it was King Abimelech. He's telling Sarah, "Hey, just FYI, you're my sister." Do we not see this? How, yeah, I'm just, you're my sister. But God intervened through a dream to Abimelech, and Abimelech released Sarah. And so at the end of this reading, and it seems like we've come so far, it seems like there's been a more than a year has passed in today's reading. But at the end of this reading, we see the birth of the long awaited child of Isaac.
You know, so many times we see these people and we're like, "Why would they do that?" But then I look at us like, why do we do the things we do? We try to
So
comfort
true.
ourselves, provide for ourselves, take care of ourselves, whatever it is. I think so many times they had different issues, but instead of pointing fingers like, I don't believe they did all these things, we should really look in the mirror and say, yeah, I often try to take matters into my own hands instead of trusting God. But the good news is we have a baby. Like it's been a while. Finally, Isaac is born, the promised child, and so I'm sure everything will be fine from here, right, Michelle?
Oh,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah, no problem. But what I see in these chapters is that God, again, continues to connect and care for very flawed people, people who
Mm,
laughed at his
so
promises,
true.
people who chose to live in the middle of wickedness, people who try to negotiate with God, people who lied about their wife being their sister. And this gives me hope. It should bring us all hope that we are not too messed up for
Mm,
God to care about us or to see us. And I think often as Christians, we see this the Christian faith is this list of laws. We need to do this and
yeah.
we need to do that. But instead, these chapters really show that our relationship isn't based on our faithfulness, but it's based on God's faithfulness. So our relationship with Him is centered on God's faithfulness. It's not up to us, which I'm so glad, but we can still see God and we can ask Him to help us be faithful, to make the right choices, to trust in Him.
Hmm. And so that brings us to our word of the day, which is faithful. We serve a faithful God, just as Tricia talked about. If you look up faithfulness in the dictionary, it says given with strong assurance.
Hmm.
It's binding. It's like it can't be broken. It's binding. Faithful also means loyal, true to the facts. And I can't help but think of, in the Jesus Storybook Bible, at the end of every story
Hmm.
in the Old Testament, it says God is a never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever loving God. And that's really what I felt as I was reading through the chapters for today, is that we have this never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever God who loves us. And as I was reading today, I there is a part of me that was encouraged to say, okay, so all these people mess up, they sin in incredible ways. I sin in
Yes.
incredible ways. And yet we are not, just as you were talking about, Trisha, we are not too messed up for God.
Mhm.
He comes alongside of us and he's like, yeah, you messed up. I forgive you. And I continue to just set you aside and move you on your way. You can negotiate with me. I'm not always going to give in to your negotiations, but I'm going to always love you. And I'm just so thankful we do. We serve a faithful God.
Absolutely.
And one other piece that stood out to me, um, one other piece that stood out to me today was in chapter 18, verse 19, where God says, I have singled him, and he's talking about Abraham. I've singled him out so that he will direct his sons and their families to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and
Mm.
just. Abraham was singled out because God knew that he would do all that was asked of him. And that is an incredible charge that God knew God knew Abraham would do all that he was asked of him. And that's, do I do that? Like, do I do all that God asks of me? It's just a humbling thought to
And
say,
even when he
oh,
messed up, because there were times we just read about him lying and saying his wife was his sister, God still considered him faithful because he was
yeah.
stepping out and doing what God asked by going to the promised land, by having the son, by listening to God. It wasn't like he didn't ever mess up, but God still saw Abraham's faithfulness. And that is so encouraging.
hmm It is so encouraging. Okay, so we've come to today, the end of today, and tomorrow's reading is Genesis 21, verse 8 through chapter 23, verse 20. And then we're going to go back to Genesis 11, verse 32, and then jump forward again, Genesis 24, verses 1 through 62. And you can also find this at the dailybiblepodcast.net. And please leave your comment on Instagram or in our Facebook group, the Daily Bible Podcast. We would love to hear where you are. We'd love to hear your comments and just what you're thinking and what God is teaching you. So please take 5 minutes today and leave us a comment. And we just want to encourage you. We want this, our time together with you and with me and Tricia, just two friends hanging out. We want this to be daily encouragement for us and also for you to get into the Word and be the hands and feet of Jesus. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.
Yay.